get you out on time. I sure appreciate you coming. I know 4 o'clock is a hard session to come to, right? Because you've probably been here all day and it gets a little bit exhausting. So I really appreciate you being here. I want to tell you, I remember so vividly a moment when I was 8 years old. And I was listening to my parents and their friends talk about work. And I will tell you that I was raised in a blue-collar family. So we did not have a boss among us, per se, right? These were all line workers. And I remember listening to they and all of their friends complain about their colleagues because they said their colleagues weren't doing their job. And so that caused the people who were complaining to take on more work to get it done. And in my 8-year-old, full of wisdom mind, I said, well, they should just go to the manager, and the manager should tell the employee to do it right. If they don't do it right, then they should just fire them. Yeah, you know that that doesn't work, right? And now that I don't have that 8-year-old mind, I have a much older mind full of much more wisdom and experience. I know that that's not the way to go. But I do know that 2 things have stayed the same since I was 8 years old, at least in business. First of all, communication is the way that we transfer information, any information in business. Communication, a business could not exist without communication. And when I use the term communication, I use a mathematical equation. Communication equals sending messages plus receiving messages. Sending messages plus receiving messages. So the manager, my 8-year-old mind, needed to send that message. You do that job the way I told you to do it or I'm going to fire you, right? And she could have heard, I'm in a union. She's not going to fire me, right? She can't fire me because I'm in a union and I've got all of these rights. So she wouldn't have to change what she was doing at all. So what I said and what she heard, 2 very different things. And that's actually the goal of communication, to try to get the message that's received to be as similar as possible to the message sent, right? So we know that that was hard. So that's one thing that's the same since I was 8 years old. Second thing that's the same since I was 8 years old is people hate having difficult conversations. People hate having this idea of managing conflict because it sounds so hard to do. And I will admit, it's not necessarily easy to do for a number of reasons. My personal interest in this topic is the fact that I grew up right outside of Cleveland, Ohio. I was told I lived in the Midwest. That's what all my history books told me. I moved to Philadelphia, between Philadelphia and Washington, D.C. when I was in my early 20s. So I moved to the East Coast. I like to say that I became an adult on the East Coast, and I picked up a lot of the East Coast communication norms, which are very different than the Midwest norms, as you know. I came to Kansas City in 2004 for a position as a professor at Rockhurst University. And even though I studied communication, I was hit in the face with Midwest nice. I didn't know what it was called then, but I knew that you spoke a very different language than I spoke. I've been here for 20 years trying to navigate this Midwest nice thing, and I think I finally have it figured out. Or I have it figured out in a way that I haven't read yet anyone else having it figured out. So I'll be interested in what you have to say at the end of today's program. The program, of course, is called Can You Manage Conflict and Be Midwest Nice? Okay? And that's the question that I'm going to answer for you today. I would like to know where you stand, and I'm only going to give you 3 choices here. I'd rather have a root canal. I don't like conflict, but I'll do it. Or no problem, let me go to another session. How many of you are in the ones, I'd rather have a root canal than manage conflict? We got one, okay? How many of you are in that middle? I don't like it, but I'll do it. And how many of you, no problem? Well, you guys get out of here then, right? Go to another session because you already know what you're doing. So this is what I'm going to cover today. Do I really want to be Midwest nice? Okay? And that's a hard question. And you're going to have emotions over this, and that's perfectly normal. And you don't have to make a decision today, but I definitely will expand your thinking on this today. 6 steps to being Midwest nice and managing conflict, and then how can I be involved? And that's how can I be involved with me, because I am actually writing a book on how to manage conflict within the context of Midwest nice and other conflict avoidance societies. So if you are interested in being interviewed for that or learning about the upcoming programs, I'll definitely get your information at the end. If you have a worksheet in front of you, go ahead and complete number 1. If you don't have a worksheet in front of you, raise your hand and I'll get you one. You can hear me? Oh, you don't have a pencil. I think we have an extra pen here. That's perfect.
There's a microphone back there if you want to.
I think that's nice and off. So I can
Take it off.
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know how to do it on. I struggle sometimes with
Yeah.
that carrying
I
on.
don't know that it is on. Is it on?
No, there's a funny thing. It should be a little funky deal.
Look at you. Is it on or is it on?
Try again.
Is it on? It's on. Okay. And is it on? It's not the same right here. You got to point the top. Yeah, there's unidirectional and omnidirectional that I've learned. So this is a unidirectional. Okay, so everybody have their answers to what kind and what nice means? Let's go ahead into the research that I've already done, and I'm going to share with you some of my preliminary results. I've interviewed a number of people and surveyed a number of people, and this is what people are telling me nice means. Nice seems to be some kind of distant descriptor, so it was hard for them to actually come up with a definition of nice. Once they started talking about it, they said, well, it's being welcoming, it's being polite, it's waving and smiling, it's pleasantry and overall nice. And I actually interviewed somebody else 2 days ago, and they added something else to the list, which is, I love in the Midwest that they use titles like sir and ma'am, and I can expect people to do that. But then I started getting some of the bad parts of Midwest nice. They smile in the front, but they gossip in the back, right? They talk a lot behind people's back. They're superficial and they're not being honest. They're people-pleasing. And so those ended up being the more popular parts of the definition of what nice is. So you can see that nice has some great qualities to it, but it also has this underlying not so nice part that's kept more secretive. When they describe kind, they said, you know, kind is, it's long-term and it's an action that occurs over time. You might be able to be kind just once, but if you don't continue to be kind, then I don't consider you a kind person.
So kind is a repeated action that takes place. Kind is how you treat others, and it's interactive with others, right? So you aren't just waving and smiling, but you are actually interacting and probably doing something for them. It's how we move through our daily life. So people who are kind move through their daily lives being kind and exhibiting acts of kindness. This one I loved. Kind means being honest with a high regard for others. So you are putting the other person in the lead position. And then one person said, the best way I can describe the difference is a social connection, which is more superficial, versus a human connection. How many of you had answers that kind of reflected these? Yeah, it's pretty consistent with everybody I've been talking to and surveying. So I'm a researcher. I have my PhD in communication with a specialty in listening, and I've been a listening researcher for over 25 years. So I could not go look up some definitions of nice and kind to see what the dictionary said about them. Because what the dictionary says about them could be different than what people say about those words. And here's what I found. Niceness is often more about manners and social expectations, while kindness is often more about genuine care and desire to make a positive impact. So we're definitely seeing some of those terms that people use to describe these two words as different. There definitely is something that distinguishes nice from kind. Niceness is typically expressed through words or gestures and is often about being pleasant, agreeable, and having good manners. So they're the social manners that we get taught. And that's why people were saying, well, I love when I move into a new neighborhood, people will wave at me when I'm out walking my dog, or they'll stop and they'll say, hey, you're the new neighbor, right? Nice to meet you. Yeah, I live over there. So niceness is that. Pleasant, agreeable, and having good manners. Kindness is typically expressed through acts. So now we're talking about actions, and is often about having a giving nature and wanting the best for others. And we see this best for others pop up again, which is really going to be critical, I think, when we talk about the difference between nice and kind. Nice, we have a regard for ourselves and making sure that we look good socially to other people. And kind is we're putting the other person first. So I might have to do something that makes me uncomfortable, but it's the kindest thing that I can do for the other person. So what's the inherent problem then in Midwest Nice? By definition, Midwest Nice focuses on being pleasant and agreeable. Conflict is not seen as pleasant or agreeable. So what's the solution then? Let's strive to be Midwest Nice and Midwest kind. So you can breathe a huge sigh of relief, because I am not asking anyone to give up their Midwest niceness. Because you know what? When I moved to Kansas City, my plan was to stay here for 2 years. Because remember, I came from the East Coast, right? I thought I'd have to wear cowboy boots and I'd see cows in the street. Well, it didn't turn out to be that way at all. And so now it's 20 years later and I still haven't moved back to the East Coast. There are a lot of things about Midwest Nice that I really like. The only thing that I don't like isn't the positive regard for others. And that's what I want you to add to your Midwest niceness. I want you to be Midwest Nice and Midwest kind. Having that honest and high regard for others and wanting the best for others. How many of you are solopreneurs? Solopreneurs. Yeah. And how many of you are, I like that, solopreneur-ish? So you have just a few employees that are reporting to you. Anybody have like larger than 5 employee company? Okay. So let me explain why this is important for all of you, because as you are in your business and start hiring employees and start working with employees, you're going to have to give feedback to your employees. And some of that feedback is going to be difficult and it's going to be hard because they're not doing the right thing. Or at least you think it's going to be difficult and hard. But it doesn't really have to be as difficult and hard as you think, particularly if you create a culture of being kind from the start. So I'm glad that people here are in more of the smaller companies or the beginning stages of companies, because this is a culture that you can really build within your company. And it's definitely in your best interest to do so, because the last thing you want is once you get up to 50 employees, you've got 5 of them that you've never had the courage to talk to, and they're bringing the business down or they're bringing you down. And you don't need that when you're growing a company. So the solution is to be Midwest nice, Midwest kind, with actions. And remember, in the beginning, I said communication is an action. Communication is sending messages and receiving messages, and confirming that the messages you received were the intention of the sender. So if you go to your workbook then, question number 2, I want you to write down a time in your past when someone told you something you didn't particularly want to hear. However, that thing really helped you grow. Go ahead and jot that down. I know the first person who did this for me was named Molly, and it goes back to our high school days. And I used to have this awful habit of thinking I had to be the smartest or best person in the room. So I would listen to others just long enough to see what they were saying, and then in my mind I would be like, how can I top this, right? How can I say something better so people will like me better than the person who just spoke? And then, of course, I wasn't listening to that person who was speaking because I was listening to respond instead of listening to understand. And Molly McCauley was one of my best friends, and we were out on a bike ride, and she said to me, you know, Laura, you don't always have to be the smartest person in the room. We like you for just being you. And that was a concept that blew me away. How could people like me if I wasn't the smartest person in the room? But I really liked Molly, so I thought she might be onto something. And so I started to not try to be the smartest person in the room. So I think Molly actually started me on this journey. When you think about your person, was your person being nice or kind? Or nice and kind? You think neither. Why?
I think she was being self-serving.
Oh.
I mean, I think at the end of the day, the criticism or the pointing out of something that I needed to change about myself was to create a better situation for her. And at the end of the day, it worked out well for me because it taught me a valuable lesson about how I was showing up and that feedback. But I really don't think it was nice for her.
Yeah, thank you for that. How many of you agree with Kim? Your person was not being nice or kind. Yeah. So I can pretty much suspect that you don't want to be that person, right? We don't want to be that person. We want to be the person who is both nice and kind. Those of you who didn't raise your hand as being the person like Kim's, how many of you appreciate what that person said to you, even though it maybe hurt a little? Yeah, turn around and look at everybody who raised their hands on this one. People appreciate the honesty. So we have to develop that confidence in ourselves, and that it never becomes totally comfortable. I'll tell you something, I've been doing this for decades, and whenever I have to have a difficult conversation, it's not comfortable, but I know that I need to do it. So it gets easier every time I do it, but I don't go in there like, oh, this is no problem at all. So which would you like to be? Midwest nice, Midwest kind, or Midwest nice and kind? And if you answered just Midwest nice, then I ask you to leave the room now because there's nothing else in this presentation for you. So we're going to move on to 6 steps to be Midwest nice and managing conflict. Now, if I could get you out of this room in just 60 minutes feeling really comfortable managing conflict, I'd be a genius and a millionaire, and I certainly wouldn't be speaking here, right? Because I would have taught this to many people out there already. That doesn't exist. What I would need is 60 minutes and a magic wand. And because I don't have the magic wand, what I'm going to do is just give you one part in the process of developing your Midwest kindness and being able to manage conflict. So it's just one part in a much larger process that helps you. So step 1, plan in advance. What change do you want to see? If you read any book, any self-help book that's out there, and there are some great ones about managing conflict. 2 in particular I love. Crucial Conversations, I think, lays it out really well, and Radical Candor lays it out really well. The problem, has anybody been trained in any of those methods, actually trained, besides just reading the book, read the book? Yeah, so what I hear from a lot of HR directors who actually get somebody certified to come in and train Crucial Conversations is that their employees do great in the room. They do great with the role plays, they're really fired up, they're smart. They can get the model or the framework. But once they leave the room, they still don't want to do it. And I think that's because of our Midwest nice, right? There's that fear of being perceived negatively by the other person, or the fear of hurting the other person, which I think is really highly involved in Midwest nice. Now, any good book out there is going to tell you that 80% of your success depends on your planning. So I'm going to take you through a planning process today so you can actually, after you leave this room, be Midwest kind to somebody in your life. So we're going to try it right now. I'd like you to think about someone in your life right now that you'd like to give feedback to. Something, identify the exact change you'd like to see in them. Some of you are solopreneurs, so this isn't going to deal with somebody who works for you, but it could be one of your clients, it could be one of your friends, it could be your partner. Think of someone in your life right now that you would like to give feedback to because you would like to see them change something in their lives. And if you look at workbook number 3, you'll be able to jot it down there. I'm aware that we only have about 30 minutes left and we have 5 steps to go, so we're going to move on, but you've got the worksheet, so you can always go back to that. So step number 2 is, how is the change in their best interest? And this is a really important part to consider, because as Kim shared with us, she didn't think that the advice or the reprimand that she got from the other person was in Kim's best interest. It was definitely in the giver's best interest, and we don't want to be that person. So how is the change in the other's best interest? So let's step back and look at this. Worksheet number 4, how does what you want the other to change show that you have their best interest at heart? Why is this going to be best for them? How is the change going to help them in the future with people who aren't you? And this is really an important question to ask, because sometimes we want people to change, but they're just being who they are. We're just being who we are, and maybe we have a difference in values, right? And that's okay, right? Maybe you don't have to work with them. Maybe you don't have to be their friend. Step number 3, the type of change you want. And this gets a little bit more confusing. It'll take a little bit more brain power, but I know you can do it. Is this change you want them to change one of these? Is it a content issue, which means they did something wrong and shouldn't do it again? So let's say that you're a manager, you have somebody reporting to you. I'll use myself as an example. My VA, I have her do a lot of different kinds of work, and one of the works is that she has to apply for me to speak at ATD events and SHRM events. And she's supposed to apply to 3 of them a week. And we keep track of it on a spreadsheet that's in Google Docs. So I look at the spreadsheet every week, and I notice 2-3 weeks went by and she didn't apply to any. And that's dangerous for me because that's my lead gen, right? That's where I get business from. And so I had to say, okay, let's have a little conversation about this. Like, what is holding you back from doing it? And really what's holding her back is she doesn't like doing it. Yeah. Okay, you don't like doing it, but it still needs to be done. So if you are going to be my VA, then I need you to do that. And so she's gotten much better with that. That's an example of a content issue. Is it a pattern? They keep doing something that harms them or those around them. So let's say that I didn't like to manage conflict at all, and I allowed her week after week to not apply to any places for me to speak. And I never said anything to her, right? That's a pattern. That's something that she's repeatedly doing that's ultimately harming me. Or is it personality? How can these things be viewed as not being trustworthy? So in personalities, there are kind of 3 exceptions. Trustworthy. You want to be perceived as trustworthy, and you want people working for you or people that you're friends with to be perceived as trustworthy. So trustworthy is really important. Is it viewed as incompetence, right? They just can't do something. Nobody wants to be viewed as incompetent, so you've got to help them become competent, or you've got to fire them, or you've got to get them out of your life somehow. Or disrespectful by people who are not you, right? So disrespectful by people who are not you, because if they are going to be representing your company, you want them to be viewed as respectful by other people. Oh, this is a harder one. So step number 4, what is your role in this? What role have you played in this issue? Maybe you haven't trained them properly, and you realized you haven't trained them properly. Right before this session, I was on a phone call with a human resources director and one of the bigwigs of a Kansas City hospital, and they require their managers to have one-on-ones every month, but the managers aren't having one-on-ones every month, and they don't have any kind of mechanism in place to make sure that the managers do. And they recognize that they never really train the managers how to do a good one-on-one. So maybe they weren't trained properly. Maybe you haven't said anything sooner. Maybe this is your fault because you were afraid to open your mouth because you didn't want them to perceive you negatively, right? And you didn't want to show up that way because it just felt really yucky to do. So that fear kept you from opening your mouth. Maybe you haven't been trustworthy with them or honest with them in the past. The first time they did this thing, you had the opportunity to correct them. But since you've allowed it repeatedly, it's become a pattern. Or it could be that the two of you have different values. And different values are something that you actually have to lay on the table and talk about, because maybe that's not a good work relationship for you. And values come in a number of different ways. I know I hated to be micromanaged. Hated to be micromanaged when I worked in the corporate environment. So I did not work well with my boss if my boss was a micromanager, right? And we had to have that talk. I had to have that talk once with my manager. I just can't work this way. I need you to trust me. My past has shown you that I get the work done, I get it done well, I get it done on time. I don't need you to check up on me every day, please. So that was a different value because her value was knowing exactly what I was doing at almost every minute of the time. I didn't stay there long. And then this is a really important question. Do you have an obligation to take action? Do you have an obligation to take action? Is this thing that the other person is doing that you want them to change, is it hurting you? Is it hurting your business? If it's hurting your business or hurting you, I would say you do have an obligation to take action. Because if you don't take action, it's just going to continue to fester as your business builds. And that could be the one thing that brings your business down. And nobody here wants that, or we wouldn't be attending this week. Step 5, plan in advance. Figure out what's important to you and why. And I got to tell you, this is maybe one of the hardest steps for us to do because we don't often ask ourselves these questions. So you want to identify 2 items in the issue before you talk to the other person. What's really important to you? What is it about this change that is important to you? I want people in my company to be viewed as respectful. I want people in my company to be viewed as honest. I want people in my company to get work done so we can satisfy the client and meet the deadline. So what is important to you in this issue? And here's the hard one. Why is it important to you? Why is it important to you? It's easier to do when we use a business example. It's harder to do when we use a personal example. Okay? Because it often, in personal examples, bumps up against boundaries. So what are the boundaries that we're going to have for ourselves and not let other people violate? I didn't realize we were going to have a disco too at the same time. So I apologize for that, as if I have control over that, right? Okay, so that was a lot of work. That was a lot of work. If you've determined all of these things, what you want them to change will help them with other people in the future. Not just you, but it will help them with other people. If you know what type of issue it is, if you personally haven't exacerbated the issue, but perhaps you have, and I gotta wait for you to get out of that, and you know what's important to you and why, then be Midwest nice and Midwest kind and schedule a meeting. Okay? This is the part that gets hard though, right? Just like crucial conversations. You can do all of this work in the room, but once you take it out of the room, it gets much harder. So one of the things that I really encourage you to do is, if your goal really is to help the others, and when you help the other, it's okay if you're helping yourself too, right? It's okay if you're helping yourself in your business. That is perfectly acceptable. Then ask them when they might be able to talk about X, whatever issue it is. So you might say something, you might email them and say, hey, Danny's my VA. Hey, Danny, I'd like to talk to you about your applications to SHRM and ATD. Could we do that next Tuesday? Would that work for you? Right? So I'm letting her know what the topic is about. I'm letting her know what the topic is about, so she's not coming in to be blindsided. And I promise you that when I sent her that message, she was like, oh, dang, she caught me, right? She caught me. And one of the things to make it easier on you is you can start the conversation by saying, I bet I'm as uncomfortable as you are right now, or maybe even more so, because I've not had conversations like this with you in the past, and that's on me. I promise to try to do better in the future. So own your part of it up front. Own your part of it up front. And then ask questions, right? Don't go in saying, you didn't do this and you need to do this. I told you to do that, right? But I asked Danny questions first. Can you help me understand why you haven't been applying to these? I need you to know the importance of these applications because that's where I get most of my clients from. So I really need to have these things booked for me, or I'm not going to be able to get clients. If I can't get clients, I'm not going to be able to keep you on as a VA because I won't have a business. So it's really best for both of us if you start applying to these places, right? So we had a great conversation. You know, she admitted she hated doing it. It was her least favorite part of the job. And I said, if you would like, at any point, just tell me you don't want to do it anymore, and I will hire an additional VA to do just that. You know, because it's really important for me to get done, so we can use your hours elsewhere if you would like that. We're still on very good terms. She's been my VA for over 2 years now, and that conversation took place 2 years ago. So, virtual assistant. I'm sorry, she's my virtual assistant. Yeah, and I only met her the first time about a month ago. She's also a photographer, so she came to one of my events and photographed me, and it was so funny to see her in 3D, right? And she's much taller than I am, which is funny because on Zoom, everybody's the same height, right? You just don't know. It won't be as bad as you think, I promise. If you follow this process and you take your notes with you and you open with a soft start by asking questions first to understand, and then it's your turn to be understood by saying what you need and why you need it. So I'm going to give you the other two interventions and then just open it up for Q&A and comments. So other inventions include individual or team training, but I guess from the number of people that we have in the room and the people who don't have a lot of people reporting to them, this one's not going to be an option for most of you. However, I will let you know that in addition to the book, I'm developing a training program that I will also have, I can't remember what they're called, Kim, maybe you can, a cohort group that goes through. So individually, a cohort group that goes through the training. So if you are interested in something like that, I'd love to get your email address to keep you abreast on when that's coming out. Also, communication structure training, and communication structures are really interesting because they are the way communication flows through an organization, and it is very important to really think about how you're going to have information flow through your organization before it gets too big. So for example, right now I'm working with a law firm, and the lawyers have always talked to the paralegals in various methods, emails, personal text, just on their cell phone, and then they have this software system, FileVine, which is supposed to include all of that. But since they don't want to type it twice, it's in different channels of communication, so it takes everybody a lot of time to try to figure that out. So establishing what those are going to be in your business, and then as your business grows, will save you so much time in the future. Not only you, but all of your employees. So 2 ways that you could be involved if you're interested. Take the Midwest NICE survey. It's linked on the handout, but of course, I'm not sure that that's going to get you there, but my email is on the handout. You can email me and you can say, give me the email or link me to the Midwest NICE survey. And what I want to end with is just encouraging you to be both Midwest NICE and Midwest kind. You have the other person's best interest at heart. And this isn't 100% of the time, right? Because sometimes when you go through this work, you find out that it really is just you that this person bothers. Like I had a colleague once who just had the worst pitch of voice for me. The pitch of her voice just grated my nerves. But I realized that was my problem. That wasn't her problem. I couldn't go to her and ask her to change the pitch of her voice. So I just tried to stay away from conversations with her as much as possible because it drove me crazy. What questions do you have for me? What questions do you have for me?
So I work at a shared commercial kitchen facility where I manage a bunch of businesses like in a space. So sometimes I have to provide guidance about how to clean properly. And I'm wondering if you have any tips on kind of the subject line you would put on an email, because that's like the first thing they'll see and it kind of set the tone for the rest of the email. So is there like a kind way to put like, it's time to talk about cleaning again?
Yeah, and you could just say, hey, do you have time to talk about cleaning again?
Okay.
Right? So just extend that invitation. If they ignore the email, then of course you've got to change the subject line on that. But once they see that, they'll probably know that there's a problem, and it'll probably be better the next day.
Okay.
Yeah.
One thing that reminds me of, because I've worked in restaurants for a long time, so it's a little different because I was thinking at the time, there would be times where I had to manage just the other staff and get them to do stuff. And I don't like being, telling, what I would often find is if I go in and I'm like, sorry guys, we have more silver we got to do or something, they'd be like, oh God, and they're really groan about it. But I found if I just comedically overshot being kind of an ass about it, like, you scurvy dogs, you gotta do the dishes, and then like really throw it at them. You're like, ah, but then it wasn't as big a deal. So almost the like comedic overshoot of being, an ass or something.
I like it.
Actually kind of work in those contexts. I don't know exactly how to do that in emails. I'm still working on that.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
but That kind of worked for me.
In daily life. Back there.
Somewhat to piggyback off of that, when I worked in nonprofit, all the volunteers I was part of the team that they reported to, and just to try to get them to read their emails, especially if we had a tough conversation with someone who's not getting paid, we would add some sort of GIFs or social reference of what's going on right now, where they would actually be excited to read those emails instead of just rolling their eyes, we messed up email, but it's trying to do something like that.
So did you have a different kind of subject line then for that?
Yeah, it would usually be like a hook of some sort of joke towards the GIF that's below it, or the picture that we were kind of correlating it through, or write it from the perspective of the whole tone of the email. So if it was let's say Game of Thrones, or something like that, phrased into that, and everybody would be excited or laughing about it.
Yeah. So humor seems to be a common theme among both of you. Yeah, and if it works, and that is great.
I had an observation that there's very much a human element to conversation.
Mm-hmm.
A similar thing that I've observed before, and I don't know again how this quite fits in with the Midwest Nice, but there was a guy that I worked for one time on a boat, literally a guy named Captain Mike, and his whole demeanor, he was from the East Coast, but he would be like, I'm an asshole, and he would just really aggressively do that, but I've been frustrated because I was like, well, that's not I haven't set myself up to be the asshole from the beginning. But that kind of gave him carte blanche to say no and stuff like that. And then, but he actually had a heart of gold, so he would come to care about people, where you'd realize that he had this kindness underneath. But the crustiness on the exterior gave him, it wasn't offensive if he refused to pick you up from the pier or something like that. That was the default,
Yeah.
So in some ways, I guess I've tried to use the comedy to kind of imitate that style, and that kind of works for me with the Midwest thing. But I don't know exactly where I'm going with that, but it feels related.
No, I like that, and I'll tell you a story in a second about being on the East Coast and coming here and kind of my thought process about what I had to do or what I had been doing.
How do you feel about approaching this wrapped in a compliment? Because that is a very Midwest nice kind of thing to do. I love everything about what you're doing, but
Yeah. That works sometimes. I don't know about you, but as soon as I hear that but, I cringe. Right? I just get really tight because I know something's coming. So that's why I'm not a huge fan of that approach.
Then you have everybody who's been trained in NLP to not So, I love everything you're doing, and could you change these 5 things?
Right, right. And then you're like, that is a confusing message. Yeah.
Something I've kind of found like with those kind of comments is putting like the growth phrase at the end of it. So it's like, I really like what you're doing. Let's see what we can do to make it better. So it kind of still has the compliment embedded, but it's a nice way of saying like, hey, we need to improve this. That's what you're looking for is the improvement of it.
Yeah.
So let's focus on that improvement. What can we do it to make it better for you? And then in there, bringing up like, oh, you know, like in the past, I've had people really struggle with this. What are your thoughts on it? Or I guess like in a way you're kind of leading them to see what it is, but then leaving it end open where maybe they're giving you a different perspective.
Yeah, I really like that. Can you say the line again? Because people might want to jot that down.
I really like what you're doing. Let's see what we can do to make it better.
I really like what you're doing. Let's see what we can do to make it better. And I liked the use of the pronoun we there, because you weren't telling them they needed to make it better. You wanted to help them make it better. Other questions or comments?
Well, I guess one about the email stage, which is, if I get an email from someone that's like, hey, can we talk about X? And I know that that's an issue. Well, then I'm going to be like kind of stressing about it, thinking about it for several days. And I don't want to inflict that on someone else for them to be worried about it. But then obviously I don't want to blindside them in the conversation.
Exactly.
Sort of the best middle ground I'm thinking of right now is just schedule it as soon as possible. Maybe tomorrow, maybe later today, or I don't know. Give them a little heads up.
It's a tough one because we are going to make people feel a little bit uncomfortable.
Right.
And if we know we have their best interest at heart, and that's what's going to come out in the conversation, then they will appreciate it. I think one of the problems with Midwest Nice is we want people to be pleasant and happy and feel good all of the time. And that's just not life, right? That is not the way that life works. And we all know, if you know psychology of any part, nobody's going to grow if they stay in their comfort zone. So sometimes we do need to make people feel a little bit uncomfortable so they can grow from that. I understand what you're saying. That one I haven't figured out, like an injection to have them not think about it until we have the conversation.
Well, even what you said about nobody's going to grow if they're in their comfort zone all the time. You can think about that discomfort that you're generating as part of the growth process.
Yeah.
So,
Anybody in here a caregiver to someone with cognitive decline? Then never mind about that, because I also have a program for that that I am developing. So if you're interested in more Midwest Nice, you're interested in being a caregiver, not being a caregiver, but are a caregiver with somebody with cognitive decline, I've got a mailing list up here, so if you would just give me your name and your email, that would be great. And that is all I have. Thank you so much.